The Jedi Council suspect that Rush Clovis, Scipio's banking clan senator, is working with the Separatists. To confirm the facts, they enlist the help of Padme Amidala to go undercover to find out the truth. Though she initially refused, she quickly changes her mind when Anakin accidentally informs her of the full details and protests to her doing it, causing friction in their relationship. Padme sets up a meeting with Clovis in the Senate restaurant to reconcile, with them not having seen each other for a long time after she had ended their former relationship. Padme gives Clovis some spiel about being unable to get anywhere with trade concessions, so he invites her to travel to Cato Neimoidia and speak to the Neimoidians about it in person. Anakin has gone undercover as Padme's pilot, with them soon arriving at Lot Dod's palace. Padme is taken to her room while Dodd and Clovis discuss the banking clan investing into a new droid factory on Geonosis. Poggle the Lesser is also involved, with the pair wanting to have a bigger cut in the profits, annoying Clovis. Padme, having decided to go for a wander, quickly stumbles across their conversation, with them deactivating the factory's hologram as she approaches. While Clovis leaves with Padme, Dodd and Poggle decide to poison Padme in order to force Clovis into an ultimatum: up their profits or she will die. Several hours later, the poison begins to take hold, but Padme still accepts Clovis's offer to tour the palace. Padme is able to distract Clovis by requesting he get her a drink, biding her enough time to access the Droid Factory's plans, taking them, and then having to quickly hide them behind her back when he returns. Padme quickly hugs Clovis to hide the contents of her hand as Anakin walks into the room after having been alerted by her. She gestures to Anakin to pick up the plans, which he does with the Force. Padme suddenly collapses as Anakin gives the plans to R2 and informs him to prepare the ship to leave. Dodd informs Clovis that Padme is a Republic spy, but he finds this hard to believe, but soon realises this himself when he discovers that the hologram's data disk has been stolen. He confronts her soon after, with her regarding him as a traitor. Anakin arrives and manipulates Clovis into giving the antidote by alluding to him returning the disc as a result, which leads to Clovis threatening Dodd's life for it. Dodd begrudgingly gives the antidote to them, and Anakin makes it back to the ship with Padme, but reveals his deception to Clovis when he doesn't return the disc. Anakin administers the antidote to Padme as they leave, before Dodd and Poggle, with battle droids beside them, request Clovis's presence. The Republic have launched their invasion to shut down the newly operational Geonosis Droid Factory. They decide to do a three-pronged attack, with Anakin, Obi-Wan and Ki-Adi-Mundi's forces in order to shut down the factory's shields. Ahsoka notes that they have heavily fortified front lines, but Anakin assures her that they will not be going near that area. Obi-Wan's fleet is the first to launch, with the others launching soon after, though both Anakin's and Mundi's get shot down, while the pair lose communication with Kenobi. They both decide to push forward to eventually locate him. Cody orders clone troopers Waxer and Boyle to locate Kenobi, which they quickly do within a downed LAAT, with only Kenobi and clone trooper Trapper having survived the impact. The focus then turns to making sure they are still alive when the others catch up to them. Anakin and Ahsoka run into the fortress that the former did not expect to encounter, with Ahsoka being annoyed that Anakin had forgotten her mentioning it. While Anakin and Ahsoka plan to destroy the fortress, Mundi and his clones come across a cave area where they are suddenly attacked by Geonosians, requiring them to utilize flamethrowers to advance through. Ahsoka and Anakin have reached the top of the fortress, where they encounter droidekas from hatches within it, and with the help of Captain Rex, they are able to quickly dispatch of them and place bombs. The three quickly flee the area, as the fortress is destroyed. Mundi, having dispatched of the Geonosians, has reached the other end of the cave, where he reunites with Anakin, who is able to secure a fighter squadron from Larsen to help reinforce the landing site, which aids Obi-Wan just in time. With the others soon reuniting with him, they quickly devise a plan to destroy the Droid Factory's shield by having Anakin take his clone forces inside of it, including their tanks, who make quick rubble of the generator and its surrounding turrets. With their goal finally having been achieved, Mundi and Kenobi leave the battlefront as Anakin and Ahsoka begin to plan their direct attack on the factory. Luminara and her Padawan, Barriss Offee, arrive on the battlefront. The four Jedi plan an attack from inside the factory itself, with Ahsoka and Barriss using the underground catacombs to gain entry, while Anakin and Luminara create a diversion outside. The Padawans are able to sneak past the droids as they begin to battle with Anakin and Luminara's forces. Barriss cuts an entrance into the tunnels, with them soon encountering a nest of sleeping Geonosians, which they have to crawl past. One of the Geonosians puts its hand on Barriss's head, with Ahsoka having to quietly move it, but this causes it to wake up, unbeknownst to the pair, and it follows them. With the Jedi having the upper hand in their battle, Poggle's tactical droid, TX-21, deploys their new weapon, known as super tanks, which are much more reinforced against weaponry. Ahsoka and Barriss finally reach the control room, but the Geonosian trailing them alerts TX-21 to their presence, and as they finish placing the bombs, they are confronted. The super tanks make quick work of the clone artillery, forcing Anakin and Luminara to lure them onto the bridge and destroy it. While TX-21 gloats that they cannot destroy his super tank with a thermal detonator, the same can't be said for him, and with the Geonosians having taken the bombs, Ahsoka and Barriss decide to take control of the super tank to destroy the power generator. With no other options, they risk their lives to complete their mission. Anakin tries to do everything he can to rescue his Padawan, while Luminara feels that it's too late, with the Padawans using their lightsabers to light up their surroundings after having been buried alive. Ahsoka uses one of the tank's power cells to fix her communicator, with her tampering alerting Anakin to their location, with him and Luminara then using the Force to lift the wreckage off of them. Anakin and Luminara congratulate their Padawans on their success, with Barriss crediting Ahsoka for making their survival possible. Obi-Wan and Luminara have launched a cleanup operation after their battle against the Separatists, but Luminara is instead focused on the capture of Poggle, who was able to slip away during the carnage. Poggle is fleeing west and drops a munitions box, which Luminara later uses to follow his trail to the Progate Temple. Anakin informs the other Jedi of an approaching sandstorm, but Luminara decides Poggle's capture is enough to risk it, much to the rest of the Jedi's dissuasion. Once Luminara reaches the temple, she finds no trace of Poggle, informing the Jedi of this, but she is quickly attacked by some unknown force, with the sandstorm preventing anyone from going after her. Once the storm clears, Obi-Wan and Anakin take a troop to the temple, where they quickly discover that Luminara is missing, with her lightsaber being left behind. The temple reveals the existence of a Geonosian queen, which had only been a rumour. While Anakin and Obi-Wan begin to search the temple with their clones, Luminara is revealed to have been shackled and dragged by some Geonosians. She wakes up and tries to escape, but realises these are not regular Geonosians, but are in fact undead ones. She quickly contacts Obi-Wan, telling him to leave before she is overrun by them. Though, the pursuing Jedi soon encounter the undead themselves, with the clones being unable to defeat them. Luminara has been taken to the Geonosian Queen, while Obi-Wan instructs the clones to line the perimeter to have a getaway plan prepared, but first he tries to speak to the Queen directly. The Queen reveals she has brain worms that take over the mind of its host and connects them to a hive mind controlled by her, with this being the reason why she has taken Luminara, so they can infect the Jedi Order and Republic directly, expanding the Geonosian Empire. Obi-Wan gets the clones to execute their plan to temporarily blind the Geonosians just before the worm can infect Luminara, though Anakin kills the brain worm before Obi-Wan can take it for analysis, while also taking Poggle with them. The clones then shoot out the support beams of the room, burying the Queen inside her temple, with the Jedi all quickly fleeing as the temple collapses, with them hoping that the brain worms die with it. Mace Windu needs medical supplies after a conflict on Dantooine, forcing the Jedi to split up, with Anakin, Luminara, Ki-Adi-Mundi and Obi-Wan deciding to take Poggle to Coruscant for trial, while leaving it up to Ahsoka and Barriss to meet up with Kit Fisto, collecting the supplies from the medical base above Ord Cestus. Unbeknownst to them, one of the brain worms has survived the temple's destruction and infects the sleeping clone Skyve, before the squad join Ahsoka and Barriss on their mission, with the infected Skyve having secretly brought more brainworm eggs with him. The Padawans set course, with Ahsoka not being able to sleep as she is finding it hard to get used to things being so quiet and steady after coming from the front lines. The pair decide to go and eat to help pass the time. While they do this, Skyve enters the clone barracks and infects the others with the brain worms before taking them to the bridge and executing the pilots. Infected clones Ox and Edge attack Ahsoka and Barriss in the mess hall, causing the Padawans to have to defend themselves before two more clones, Havoc and Trap, enter the room with the Padawans holding them at lightsaber point, but these two are seemingly not infected, protesting their innocence and not knowing the reasoning for the attack. Ahsoka, Barriss and Trap decide to check the bridge while Havoc watches Ox and Edge, but before they can access the bridge, the infected clones enable the shields. Barriss tries to disable the shields, but Trap reveals himself to be infected and tries to spread it to Barriss, but she kills him and they cut up the brainworm, finally realizing what the cause of all this is. Barriss and Ahsoka decide to split up, with Ahsoka contacting Kit Fisto as Barriss makes her way to turn off the ship's thrusters, though the latter is unsuccessful when she's lured into a trap by the infected clones. Ahsoka contacts Rex and Anakin, informing them of the situation. After concluding this, she is attacked by a newly infected Barriss, but Ahsoka quickly knocks her back and flees, being able to hide in the ship's ventilation shaft. Anakin recontacts Ahsoka via her wristcom and tells her that the key to stopping the worms is to lower the ship's temperature, with Ahsoka quickly rupturing the coolant system just as they exit hyperspace. Ahsoka tries to slow the ship down to avoid an impact with the medical base, but the infected Barriss tries to attack her before she can achieve this. Ahsoka directs one of the coolant pipes directly at the infected Barriss, with Barriss briefly regaining control and wanting Ahsoka to kill her to end their suffering, but Ahsoka will not do what Barriss has requested. The worm regains control and exposes itself, allowing Ahsoka to kill it without affecting Barriss. The ship has been successfully docked, and Fisto decides it's time to board it. With the temperatures now being below freezing, he finds Ahsoka holding Barriss, with both of them being heavily affected by the freezing cold. Later, Ahsoka suddenly wakes up to Anakin by her bedside. He assures her that everything is okay. Ahsoka wonders if she made the right choices during the ordeal, but Anakin tells her that Barriss only said what she did because she thought it was the only way, but Ahsoka knew otherwise, that she could save lives without taking any. Anakin leaves in order to inform the remaining forces on Geonosis of the brain worm threat. The production codes for this story arc are CW205 Senate Spy, CW207 for Landing at Point Rain, CW208 for Weapons Factory, CW209 for Legacy of Terror, and CW212 for Brain Invaders. Senate Spy was written by Melinda, with Landing at Point Rain and Weapons Factory being written by Production Season 2 staff writer Brian Larsen. Legacy of Terror was written by Owen Mahoney, and Brain Invaders by Andrew Kreisberg. Senate Spy, Legacy of Terror, and Brain Invaders have additional writer credits to Production Season 2's supervising and staff writers Drew Z. Greenberg and Brian Larsen, while Landing at Point Rain and Weapons Factory have one additional writing credit to supervising writer Drew Z. Greenberg, with them adapting the scripts throughout the stages of each episode's production. Senate Spy, Legacy of Terror, and Brain Invaders were all directed by Steward Lee, while Brian Kalin O'Connell directed Landing at Point Rain and Giancarlo Volpe directed Weapons Factory. Cary Silver produced all 5 episodes, with Catherine Winder being given an executive producer credit due to her involvement with the pre-production of episodes from the Clone Wars' second production season. The Return to Geonosis featurette regards the second Battle of Geonosis story arc as 4 episodes, not including Senate Spy, hence its designation as a prelude, with this story arc becoming the first to be regarded as a 4-part story after plans for the Ryloth arc to contain 4 episodes were scrapped. The second Battle of Geonosis story arc is the first of 2 arcs within the show that included a prelude episode, setting up the main plot of the succeeding multi-part story arc. Counting the prelude, it is the longest story arc produced for the show at 5 episodes, considering the story arc that was adapted into the Dark Disciple novel was intended to be 2 separate story arcs produced during the show's 6th and 7th production seasons, which, if gone to plan, would have aired 4 episodes as part of a 20-episode network TV length release season 7, and another 4 episodes as part of a 20-episode 8th and final network TV length release season. A true heart should never be doubted. Before the creation of Clovis, the episode was intended to feature the character of Palo, who was mentioned by Padme within Attack of the Clones. Though on further inspection, this was decided against due to Palo having been established as having abandoned politics to focus on art, while the relationship between the pair was also stated to be when the two were very young, when Padme was 12. The production team thought it was better to introduce a past relationship of Padme's that she had while she was an adult, as it lended to Anakin's jealousy dynamic better. Clovis shares some similarities with the character of Tophen Vane from the Hero of the Confederacy Clone Wars comic, created by production season 1 head writers Henry Gilroy and Stephen Melching, with both Tophen and Clovis being barons who are rivals to Anakin. The act of the Jedi sending Padme undercover to infiltrate Lot Dod's palace to retrieve plans is similar to how they would later get Quinlan Vos to go undercover as a bounty hunter in order to work with Asajj Ventress to assassinate Dooku. Both times, they are putting these characters who aren't usually involved in these situations in a lot of danger, with both of them having unintended consequences. This episode marks the show's production debut of the Senate Rotunda Chambers and Corridor, also revealing that the Senate pods have sound dampening technology to allow private conversations between its occupants. The console design on the pods has also been simplified compared to its visual design within the live-action prequel trilogy. Padme gets a bunch of new assets in this episode, including her Revenge of the Sith apartment veranda, a new ship asset with the introduction of her Starskiff, and her ball gown outfit. The Jedi Temple's entrance gates and Cato Nemoidia also make their TV debut after appearing in Revenge of the Sith. Anakin's takeout dish is designed on R2-D2 tea towel merch and reads warm food on its side with sushi depicted on its top. Obi-Wan takes notice of Anakin's reaction to Padme's backstory of once having been close with Clovis, with this clearly being an indicator that he knows more than he lets on about the pair's relationship. Anakin uses clicks as a measurement of time, while the term clicks with a K has been used to describe distance in kilometers. The measurement of how long a single click is unknown as of this episode. An unproduced scene present on the Season 2 Blu-ray release had the establishing shots using placeholder imagery from the live-action prequel movies, as well as having Clovis initially walk up to the table to greet Padme in place of the Betty bot serving them. Clovis is also featured with more of a noticeable Neimoidian-like accent within his temp vocals, with it being changed to a more posh British-esque one in the final production. Padme and Clovis meet in the Senate dining area, a new location created for the episode that unfortunately did not appear again, though if it was planned to, it would have most likely showed up in Padme's unproduced Season 8 story arc that was to be the arc to air before the series finale, The Siege of Mandalore. During their conversation, Padme mentions the HoloNet, which made it canon to George Lucas's continuity, as well as canon as part of the 2014 continuity reset. Concept art for the palace's landing platform places the Naboo star skiff on the opposite platform to the one it appears on in the produced episode. This episode marks the production debut of Lot Dodd, whose asset would be reused in future produced political episodes, including the earlier chronological one, CW204 Supply Lines. His Neimoidian aide also makes their asset debut as a background character, with Lock Durd's character asset being reused to add some variety to the background Neimoidians. Lot Dodd's holographic table in his library has a tutorial on how to 3D model written in Aurebesh. The library also has physical books made from paper. Lot Dodd's palace has doors that contain hinges, though they still seem to open automatically for people to walk through them. It also has paintings of heroic historical Neimoidians, with these elements giving the location a unique low-tech feel, not present in other prequel trilogy locations. Clovis's blaster is an asset created during production Season 1 for Satine. It is also used again by Lolo Pers in Senate Murders, making this a blaster asset that the production team liked to reuse for Senate-based characters. Despite Clovis having this blaster, there is not a single blaster shot, lightsaber ignition, or an explosion within the episode. Cato Neimoidia is a member of the Republic, as is Lot Dodd, its representative in the Senate, though he is actually a supposedly neutral corporation selling arms to both sides of the war, wanting the war to go on for as long as possible to keep profiting off of it. While the Jedi know that they are working with the Separatists, they need proof of it. Filoni stated in the online featurette for Senate Spy that it might become good to have all of these corporations on side if you were to build an empire, which is something the show would depict with the banking clan in a later season, and could have very well focused on stories around the same thing with the Trade Federation and Techno Union as a whole in one of the unproduced arcs that got cancelled in March 2013. A brief, fully animated scene that was likely intended to be included within the final cut of the episode, based on how far into production it got, had Lot Dodd being annoyed and asking Clovis why has he brought Padme there at this specific time, clearly not wanting a member of the Republic Senate to see his arms deal with Poggle. Senate Spy's plot seems to have been inspired by Alfred Hitchcock's 1946 movie Notorious, while the visuals in the episode have a lot of parallels to Disney movies, with shots being reminiscent of Beauty and the Beast, including the one with Clovis looking at Padme on the stairs, as well as Anakin being the knight looking up at the tower where his princess is located, with Clovis also having a more square jawline like Gaston does in that movie. Padme is also poisoned like Snow White, while Clovis is the huntsman who ends up saving her, also having worked for the antagonist at the same time, with it being possible that this episode was even pitched as a Star Wars take on a classic Disney movie. Clovis's Disney-like design traits would be lessened for his return appearance later within the show. Padme hiding the data disk behind her back is similar to the piece of concept art created for Revenge of the Sith, where she hid a knife behind her back in order to defeat Anakin on Mustafar, though she would have failed to go through with it. A parallel to A New Hope is depicted when Anakin gives R2 the data disk, like Leia gave R2 the Death Star plans. The ending of the episode implies that Clovis might not make it out alive, though due to this being something that would have happened off screen, it was something they were fine discarding in order to bring him back for a larger role. An alternate ending was prevised, which had Anakin interact with Dodd, who had a droid army outside in front of Padme's ship, with Anakin stating that they contacted Naboo and had been informed to return Padme to Coruscant for treatment. This line was voiced by Matt Lanter before it was changed as to who delivered it. Dodd wants to detain the pair, but Clovis uses the situation to threaten Dodd for the antidote using a droid's blaster, thus explaining why he ended up reusing Satine's blaster asset in the final episode, due to how late of a change this would have been, as the episode had not been planned, with Clovis having had a weapon of his own. Dodd directly gave the antidote to Clovis, with 3PO then taking it from him, with the scene ultimately having Anakin still leave with the disc and abandon Clovis to deal with the fallout. There is still evidence of this original sequence in the final episode, where it cuts to Anakin, Cary and Padme on the ship's ramp, skipping any shot of them being near the palace's entrance, as well as the presence of the droids in the last shot with Lot Dodd. Clovis's accent in this alternate ending is also somewhat different compared to the earlier deleted scenes, losing its Neimoidian-esque quality. The ending in the final episode makes the sequence even closer to the movie it was inspired by, having the stairwell scene with Clovis and Dodd being a direct reference to Notorious, with the final shot of Clovis being left behind to deal with the consequences also being the same. Believe in yourself, or no one else will. The newsreel for this episode reuses footage from CW205 Rising Malevolence and CW205 Storm over Ryloth. There are also shots that have been backported from the sequel episode CW208 Weapons Factory. The episode pitch from George Lucas was essentially a D-Day landing on Geonosis. Landing at Point Rain is a notorious episode from a production standpoint in that it made it all the way to at least the story reel stage before being reviewed by George Lucas, who disliked it and required the production team go back to the drawing board, with them essentially having to scrap that entire episode's plot and create a new one, adding what would have technically been an extra episode within production season 2. This incident was brought up again more recently within the 20th anniversary of Lucasfilm Animation panel at Celebration 2025 with Filoni and Defina Portillo, who was the line producer for the show at the time. The final episode was reshot with a lot of different placeholder footage from sources including live-action movies and older produced episodes, with Filoni stating that the final version of landing at Point Rain makes up for Senate Spy's lack of action. A sequence from the original version of CW207 exists as a temp voice story reel clip on the Season 2 Blu-ray, with the episode originally featuring communications clones known as Ham and Chatter, with them having to avoid an incoming crash landing LAAT, as well as defend themselves against Geonosians as they try and contact Ki-Adi-Mundi's clones to see if they have successfully landed, with Chatter almost being stabbed by a Geonosian before being saved by Anakin. Chatter's design further reinforced that he is a rookie clone, being very clean looking. These communication clones initially had huge packs as seen in the reel, as well as antennae on their helmets, but in the end, George Lucas saw them as redundant due to communicators being fairly common within Star Wars, and thus the two characters were removed as a result, alongside that specific communications division of the 501st as a whole. Another sequence from the original CW207 plot featured Mundi with a regular clone legion marked with red markings, matching closer to his legion seen in Revenge of the Sith. They are surrounded and outnumbered by droids and Geonosians, being backed into a cave, with Ahsoka and Anakin reinforcing Mundi after having tried to locate him as part of the episode's plot. This scene got as far as having lighting concepts created for it before it was cut. The original episode's plot seems to have been more focused on Anakin locating Mundi, who had crashed and lost communication with them, with the real scene of the destruction of the Separatist wall being located between the two completely cut scenes, suggesting that the wall was originally meant to be destroyed in order to reach Mundi on the other side, before it was too late. It is heavily implied between the deleted scenes released for this episode and its sequel episodes Weapons Factory and Legacy of Terror that Obi-Wan wasn't originally actively present in the battle, if featured in the episode at all. The final episode changed the plot so that Mundi and Anakin would make their way to Obi-Wan's location separately, having him get seriously injured instead of Mundi, though Mundi still holds his gut and limps in certain scenes, only to then fight completely fine with his lightsaber, which is presumably residue from the original shot version. The final episode that was produced had much more detailed battle sequences than what the original real version would have had, with there being lots of cuts between the different faction battles, something which was most likely done under George Lucas's guidance, who is known to favour doing fast-paced cutting between action sequences. The communications clone design was repurposed into a special unit for Ki-Adi-Mundi, with insignia designed after his head pattern and being specifically painted brown and orange for Geonosis. They were also meant to represent a precursor to the clone commando armour, with this design also being reused again in CW217 Cat and Mouse as Special Ops Troopers, which had some shots in that even still having the orange colouring and Mundi insignia from this episode. The cave location was repurposed for another sequence present in the final episode, which also featured the backpack asset, while the Geonosis wall fortress, called Wall o' Death in its concept designs, was kept, but it no longer was used as the last major hurdle for Ahsoka and Anakin to reach Mundi. The final episode also seems to have added the subplot of the weapons factory having a shield they need to deactivate. Kenobi's LAAT has a painting of a Nexu creature on it, while also stating Bad Kitty in Aurebesh, which is a nod to the name that ILM gave the Nexu during the production of Attack of the Clones, while Mundi's LAAT has a skull-faced clone helmet with the phrase Separatist Nightmare. This episode marks the debut of an updated Y-Wing asset, which has been retextured to feature a more burgundy brown colour to fit in with the environment. The episode also confirms that Commander Cody was not present at the initial Battle of Geonosis. A Filoni sketch of both Anakin's and Mundi's crash sites was shared on the Season 2 Blu-ray, being an example of how the production team would map out the episode's events before officially entering production. While the LAAT landing craft make their first on-screen debut, release-wise within this episode, they were actually created for CW206, the previous production episode. A lot of Geonosis was designed for this and the 2 subsequent episodes that took place on the planet, with the production team wanting to show the scale of the siege being planet-wide by adding more and more into the opening sequence to represent this. A milestone in the Clone Wars production also exists within this episode, where all the character and vehicle models have been coated with dust and sand in order to exemplify the environment they are present in. Joel Aaron went back to these episodes later on and exemplified the explosion effects, adding shards to them. The Clone Wars depiction of blood on Obi-Wan's cuts is one of the few times the show would have human blood shown within it. This episode finally marks the Clone Wars debut of Ki-Adi-Mundi after he was cut from CW123 Holocron Heist due to asset limitations, with landing at Point Rain essentially being his Jedi Showcase episode after Plo Koon, Luminara and Ayla Secura had theirs in the previous production season. Ki-Adi-Mundi's design was purposely simplified for the Clone Wars in order to keep in line with its art direction and not to look too photorealistic. Though, he interestingly has yellow eyes, something they would change with his later production appearances in order to make yellow eyes more distinctively a Sith/Darkseid trait. Some of the Geonosians throughout this episode have milky eyes, being a clear indicator of them being undead, before the revelation of this in 2 episodes' time. Waxer and Boyle return in this episode, being the first regular clones production-wise since the Now to make a comeback in subsequent episodes. This is before Fives and Echo would become the main returning clones. Considering their redesigned armour and its colour scheme, as well as Kenobi's added inclusion into the plot, it is most likely that Waxer and Boyle's return was a result of the 2 new clones, Ham and Chatter, having been cut, especially considering they both had similar roles of locating Mundi and Kenobi, with them only briefly appearing to rescue Kenobi from his downed LAAT and not being relevant to the rest of the episode. Trapper's inclusion in this scene is also brief and odd, considering he was part of a different clone legion with Mace and Anakin on Manastere in the later produced Zillo Beast episode. Waxer and Boyle have now become ARV troopers wearing camo armor in this episode, which is the same for all of Kenobi's forces bar Commander Cody. The pair have both painted a decal of Numa on their helmets. Despite Cody, Waxer and Boyle all mentioning that they have secured a square, wide shots in the episode reveal it is actually a circle. George Lucas was directly responsible for the tunnel sequence in the final episode, including clone flame troopers, even getting them to add Ki-Adi-Mundi's voice line to bring them in. This final sequence repurposed several shots from the original plan for this location, being that Mundi was to be found and rescued here by Anakin and Ahsoka after being more severely wounded. Filoni illustrated to Joel Aaron how he wanted the effect of the flames to look. The sound effect of the Geonosians consists of mating penguins mixed with fruit bats. With Clone Jet being created after the communication clones were scrapped, it is possible that we would have seen a Phase 1 armoured Baccara within the episode as one of the clones with rep markings. Jet being a last minute addition is also shown, with him being referred to as both a captain by Mundi just after they crash and Yularen before they enter the cave, with Jet even referring to himself as a commander within the same conversation as the latter example. This perhaps suggests that Baccara was a captain at this point in the war, before becoming a commander sometime later, in a similar vein to Apo being a sergeant in the Umbara arc and then a commander in Revenge of the Sith, with the times Jet is referred to as a captain likely being from conversations taken from the original version of the episode before its major rework. The original episode ended with just Anakin and Mundi waiting for reinforcements who would not have arrived until the following episode. The planet of Dorin is mentioned within the beginning of this episode. The expanded universe established this as the homeworld of Plo Koon species, the Keldor, which the 2014 continuity reset also adopted. A reference to the 1962 movie, The Longest Day, is made during the sequence where Anakin, Ahsoka, Ki-Adi-Mundi and their troops do a final charge towards the Geonosian front. Mundi's reference of Mace Windu's efforts on Dantooine is a clear nod to the 2003 Clone Wars microseries, though it is done in such a way that they could have told a story in the future that replaced that in the Lucas canon. The 2014 reset made this reference less likely to be connected to the 2003 show, though certain events from that show are still counted as having happened, including Anakin's fight with Ventress on Yavin 4. During the Star Wars Fan Days Free convention in 2009, Dave Filoni provided a prelude script to Landing at Point Rain, which was read out by the voice cast in attendance. This dealt with the fallout of Senate Spy's events, including Padme having recovered from being poisoned. It also connected it to Poggle's weapons factory and the Jedi Council's decision on whether to launch another campaign on Geonosis. The prelude also involves a sequence with General Grievous and Asajj Ventress, who are absent from the on-screen arc itself, with the latter not even appearing at all within the episodes that make up the released Season 2, due to the production team instead wanting to focus on new villains. This prelude would show us a bit of the character dynamic between Ventress and Grievous that CW205 ARC troopers would finally depict on screen. A hint to this prelude, perhaps having even been intended to feature in the episode, is present within its newsreel specifically showing footage of and calling out General Grievous directly, with the prelude itself establishing that the pair had deliberately created conflict on Dorin in order to separate the Republic's forces so less would attack Geonosis, thus explaining why the two high-ranking members of the Separatists aren't featured within the story arc. No gift is more precious than trust. Weapons Factory was an episode pitch that actually came from Dave Filoni after George Lucas couldn't figure out what to do for the middle episode, with Filoni using the episode to explore an idea he had wanted to do, where two Padawans would be contrast against each other, with them deciding to use Barriss Offee, and thus being her first major role on screen. Barriss is slightly older than Ahsoka and is the Padawan of Luminara, who herself also features in this episode after having last majorly appeared within CW110 Cloak of Darkness. An early deleted scene from this episode has Ki-Adi-Mundi, as well as his original Red Clone Legion and the 501st Clone Radio Communications Division, with them being removed from this episode to align up with how landing at Point Rain was significantly changed. The scene also suggests that the previous episode originally did not end with reinforcements that wrote Ki-Adi-Mundi out, but instead had him continue to be featured into this one, with Anakin being frustrated that they have not yet gotten any reinforcements. Luminara presumably arrived with them sometime after this scene. It also heavily implies that they did not have a shield generator to destroy, as they wouldn't have been able to do it with their limited resources. Mundi being held by the clones also further cements that he was intended to be more majorly injured within landing at Point Rain in place of Obi-Wan, who is completely absent here, which also further hints that he was planned to not be involved in the story until Legacy of Terror. Luminara's LA-18 nose art created by Randy Bantog, includes a humorous depiction of a scared Count Dooku being kicked by a clone boot. Luminara would finally get her dedicated lightsaber within the design phase of this episode after CW110 Cloak of Darkness ran out of time and asset budget to include it, resulting in her having Plo Koon's asset. Though the two are very similar, with Luminara's just having gold plating. Two of Luminara's clones, while not named within the episode itself, are called Buzz and Dra, with the script giving Dra the line of "Buckle your belts and check your cells, soldiers, we're going in." Buzz would be killed off within the next episode. Anakin and Ahsoka's briefing dialogue that is overlaid with Barriss and Luminara's conversation is Ahsoka asking Anakin if he was listening to what she was saying because she was saying the same as him, with his response being that when he says it, it is listened to more than when she does. Anakin mentioning it's good to see both Luminara and Barriss again is a nod to the expanded universe novel, The Approaching Storm, yet again being another subtle reference to the EU that George Lucas was okay with the production team including. Barriss's costume was difficult to translate into the Clone Wars due to how simple it was, with them having to change her sleeve design to add a communicator and then trimming her cape to save on cloth simulation costs. The production team wanted to add tension within the scene where Barriss and Ahsoka sneak into the weapons factory interior, so had one of the sleeping Geonosians place its hand on Barriss. Two Geonosian designs were created for this story arc, the Warrior with their wings and a smaller version called the Drone, with these two models being coloured both green and brown to increase the variety even further to 4 different Geonosian models. During the distraction battle, Luminara's more fun side pops up when talking with Anakin, aligning up more with her characterization within The Approaching Storm. This is something that doesn't seem to be remembered a lot in terms of her Clone Wars characterization, with it making sense for humour to be less present anyway because they're in the middle of a war, especially when they're back on Geonosis, which would remind them of the losses they suffered in the first battle. This is something which isn't the case with The Approaching Storm, taking place before Attack of the Clones, with the war clearly taking a toll on the Jedi's temperament, with them being used to a non-war setting, which was relatively peaceful in comparison. The design of the battle area reveals that it is a Geonosian village, which tells us that Poggle was fine using it as collateral as long as his droid factory was operational. Extra real scenes for this battle are also present, one with the stalagmite containing Geonosians being knocked down with an ATTE, as well as what was intended to be a longer sequence against the droidicas. A lot of the sequence clearly didn't even get shot, as most of the footage is using placeholder story reels of the battle in CW124, Defenders of Peace, even including Aayla Secura. Despite this, the sequence ends with new shots of Luminara, who quickly dispatches of Geonosians surrounding them. This battle seems to be another action sequence that was cut down, most likely at the request of George Lucas, as well as it being less necessary to depict due to the increase in battle sequences CW207 had for its rework. The placeholder footage also aligns up with how Henry Gilroy and Stephen Melching said on Rebel Force Radio that the scripts for the episodes were very bare bones, especially when it came to action sequences, with the production team having to fill those out during the development of the episode. The tactical droid asset has been reskinned, with TX-21 having bug markings fitting him into his role of the Geonosian tactical advisor. The super tank's design is reminiscent of the Trade Federation tanks used in the Phantom Menace, though they are a lighter brown and feature the blue CIS markings. The person who relayed the questions within Season 2's featurettes, such as why Barriss cuts a square with her lightsaber instead of a circle, was Pablo Hidalgo, with Filoni giving us some jokey lore about Barriss being a shape revolutionist. A story reel scene with temp voice acting reveals that at one point the production team considered using the feminine equivalent of master when the Padawans refer to Luminara as mistress unduly. The scene also has extra exposition of Barriss explaining that she was also briefed on how far apart the bombs should be placed for maximum effect. The original plan was for Anakin and Luminara to place the bombs on top of the tanks, but George Lucas wanted to flip the shot and have the pair blow up the entire bridge from underneath instead. The original shot sequence is present on the Blu-ray release as one of the deleted scenes that only exist in previs form. Concept art of the bridge depicted it much further away from the factory, with the factory itself also being much smaller. The destruction of the factory was the biggest explosion that the show had produced at the time. The sound design, instead of being focused on the explosion, was more focused on the music, with the possibility that Ahsoka and Barriss had perished in the blast. The episode's director, Giancarlo Volpe, personally believed that Barriss and Ahsoka were destined to be a couple during his work on the episode, with the characters being placed very close together within the wreckage of the factory to represent the fact that they had bonded. The dialogue between Luminara and Anakin over the Droid Factory's wreckage was changed, originally being longer, with Luminara directly calling Anakin out on his attachment issues. Luminara's statement about not letting compassion drive her is somewhat contradictory to what has been established about Jedi in the past, where they have been said to be driven by compassion, with this being most likely why the dialogue was changed, as well as to make her less harsh on Anakin. The dialogue was also split between two scenes, with Anakin originally stating he wanted to celebrate with his Padawan alive before the LAAT landed, which was later moved to the clearing the wreckage scene for the final episode. The overall sequence is supposed to make us aware that Anakin's attachment issues cause problems, which seems to be a key focus throughout this second production season, though Luminara is still a bit flawed herself with how she goes about respecting the way of the Jedi Code in this scene, especially when in the previous ones she had been more casual with Anakin. The scene perhaps uses her as a way to show how the Jedi started to become more unattached and focused on their role as a warrior/general, with there being a brief shot of her being excited that Barriss is alive, only for her to then seemingly correct herself afterwards, alluding to her forcing herself to be unattached, taking the Jedi teachings a bit too literally. During the planning of this episode, Barriss's force healing ability from the expanded universe was considered, but ultimately discarded, though she would eventually be implied to have it within Tales of the Empire, where she has seemingly noticeably aged due to transferring her living force to heal others. Within the Return to Geonosis featurette on the Season 2 Blu-ray, footage of Lucas and Filoni reviewing CW205 Bombad Jedi has been sneakily edited, superimposing footage of the final produced CW208, with the actual CW205 Bombad Jedi production footage being seen on the screen next to it with C-3PO. Later shots of this haven't been edited and thus continue to reveal the deception. Sometimes accepting help is harder than offering it. A page from Filoni's sketchbook reveals that story ideas for Legacy of Terror, complete with its episode title, took place during September 2007, with it mentioning the characters of Obi-Wan, Mace, Luminara, and Ki-Adi-Mundi, with Anakin interestingly not being mentioned within this list while being majorly present in the final episode, compared to Mace, who is mentioned but was presumably nothing more than an idea of a character who could feature. Based on this, and how Anakin is on the second page of the notebook, while also not being involved in the story until the narrative of the Sandstorm, the 501st not appearing outside of Rex's brief cameo, and Ki-Adi-Mundi barely being relevant to the plot, not even appearing at the end of the episode, I would not be surprised if the episode was initially intended to be Obi-Wan and Ki-Adi-Mundi investigating what happened to Luminara, while Anakin stayed on the ship instead. This practice also happened with the unproduced episodes CW205 Saving Voss Part 1 and CW206 Saving Voss Part 2, with it being revealed via Filoni's sketches that Yoda was initially to accompany Ventress and Obi-Wan to rescue Quinlan Voss from Dooku's dreadnought instead of Anakin, as featured within the Dark Disciple novel adaptation, with it being likely that this change was made by the time the Saving Voss arc had been fully draft scripted, due to Anakin later featuring heavily within the story arc, with a vigilante Ahsoka in place of a Kardashu, with the original intent probably being that he instead stayed at the temple with Ahsoka during the first half of the story. Filoni's sketchbook lists the Mummy as an inspiration for the story, as well as giving the Geonosian Queen an alternate name of Katrina, though he had also written Karina under it. He mentions the situation being mystical or scientific, which is similar to how the Force is interpreted in both ways. The Queen's lair is described as a hive or nursery, with the hive mentality keeping the zombie drones working. Filoni sketched an alternate design for Queen Karina, which gave her a more spider-like design, next to a sketch much more similar to her final one, which is labelled Termite Queen, with it stating, "Be careful of aliens," in reference to how her design is based off of the Queen Xenomorph from the Alien franchise, even having the same egg sac design and the way the eggs are placed. The last part of the sketchbook has the early episode scene of the Venator War Room, stating that Luminara tracks Poggle the Lesser, Luminara hollows in, Scramble Code, Luminara stunned, and Pile of Eggs, suggesting that Luminara was to be stunned by a droid or Geonosian weapon on screen, while also having potentially found some Geonosian eggs before she was taken. Interestingly, despite not appearing or even being mentioned within this entire story arc, Filoni also sketched Shak T, who would not make her debut in the show until the following production season, with CW301 Clone Cadets being most likely due to limitations in their at the time ability in translating her character design into the Clone Wars art style, with production season 3 allowing them to more accurately visualize her Jedi robes compared to earlier created Clone Wars character assets. Legacy of Terror continues the Clone Wars' trend of paying homage to different genres, with this episode being their take on a zombie movie. The portable command center from the first Battle of Geonosis makes its Clone Wars asset debut briefly in this episode. It would be used again once more for CW217 Cat and Mouse. Luminara's fun side pops up again briefly at the beginning of this episode, where she states she'd hate to be left out of doing other work when she gets back. Residue of the original version of CW207 is present, when Obi-Wan is completely uninjured, while also being surprised that Mundi is up and about after having been in a Bacta tank. This is clearly meant to be a follow-up after Mundi was more heavily injured in landing at Point Rain, with this episode continuing to imply that Obi-Wan was not a part of the original plot of that episode, as the narration talks as if he has arrived to help with the cleanup, instead of only leaving the battle to recover. Said narration also uses weapons factories plural, as if to allude to there being multiple beyond the one we saw in the previous episodes, despite how Senate Spy had made a big focus on that specific one. Luminara going after Poggle, despite Moody's advice against this, shows how tunnel-visioned she could get, depicting that she's more reckless than the senior Jedi Council members, and is perhaps an example of the Jedi that became too focused on the war. This is something that also happened with her off-screen pursuit of Cad Bane after he freed Zero the Hutt, which would lead to the deaths of Trace and Rafa's parents, and is also true of how she was overpowered by Ventress in Cloak of Darkness, due to her being tunnel-visioned into thinking she knew she could handle her. The Sandstorm was not in the script for the episode, with many scenes having to be rewritten so the characters would mention it. Filoni adding it to the story when he started to edit the episode, with director Steward Lee wanting to add this level of danger and tension, making it so the Jedi cannot help Luminara as quickly as they'd like to, which allows time for the zombie threat to grow and makes the episode stand out more compared to the other two Geonosis episodes. The scene where OM5 gets caught in the storm would have also been an addition to the episode during or after this decision was made, with Poggle losing all of his droids in the storm. Luminara states that she saw Poggle enter the temple, but that isn't true in the final episode, where instead it just shows her arriving with Poggle's unoccupied tank being left outside, with this most likely being residue from the original script that lacked the sandstorm. The effects of the sandstorm were recolored smoke particles originally created for CW205 Children of the Forces Mustafar scenes, with the intensity also being represented with the level of sound it has between its outside depiction and its depiction from within the Venator. Luminara was given Hondo Onaka's goggle asset to wear during the speeder sequence, as the episode would have already gone through its design phase before the storm was added, not allowing them time to design and create a new asset. Luminara's speeder sequence used placeholder reel footage from CW205 Trespass, as confirmed by the deleted scenes for this episode on the Season 2 Blu-ray. Another potential residue that this episode has for the original CW207 is the lack of the 212th ARF troopers appearing, with them instead being regular 212 clones, despite the Legion specifically changing their armour in the reworked version of CW207 to be camo armour for the Geonosian climate. This alludes to how the camo armour was probably something that was created after Moody's camo special ops troopers, considering they both share the same overall colour scheme, with CW209 already being shocked with the regular trooper models before they realised the discrepancy. Cody not having camo armour in this episode could also explain why he didn't in CW207, with him being the only 212 clone to appear in both episodes. Instead of a punch to the Geonosians midsection that revealed to Luminara that the Geonosians are zombies, the script described an alternate act of her impaling a Geonosian on a broken stalactite. However, the final shot is still somewhat gruesome, with Luminara's fist going right through the Geonosian's gut. This story coincidentally came out the same year as the Death Troopers novel. Obi-Wan uses the miles figure of measurement, while Anakin both states, "I have a bad feeling about this," as well as echoing a line his son would later use with, "That's not true, that's impossible." Poggle's title of Lesser is directly contrasted with Queen Karina's title of The Great, with Poggle's name perhaps suggesting that Lucas always intended to feature a Geonosian above Poggle, but they didn't appear within their debut in Attack of the Clones due to not being relevant to the plot of that story. Queen Karina also refers to Geonosis as Geonosia, revealing what perhaps is the planet's true and/or original name. The sound team were concerned with how they were going to make Queen Karina's sound effects distinctive, but D. Bradley Baker came to the rescue with his vocal performance, which was used to help the animation of the character. Karina stating that Poggle is young reveals that she herself must be much older. The sequence with Queen Karina was originally longer, with Obi-Wan noticing Luminara himself from afar, instead of Commander Cody, who got a unique red vision sensor visually depicted on his helmet. Instead of Obi-Wan stating to the Queen that her reign was at an end, the Queen was instead annoyed with Poggle for bringing the Jedi there, visibly spitting slime on him, though she didn't let the Jedi take Poggle to be arrested for his crimes. The previs also noticeably treats Queen Karina like other Geonosians, where she doesn't speak Basic, with this predating D. Bradley Baker's involvement in the creation of her final voice. Obi-Wan ignited his saber, causing all the Geonosians to fly into it like a bug zapper, while the clones used their helmet lights to blind the Queen, leading her to destroy some of the cave with her egg sac. Obi-Wan then jumped up and cut Luminara free, before quickly cuffing Poggle and also saving a clone from being killed, before the three Jedi force push rubble into the Queen, being more directly responsible for her death. Interestingly, not all of this scene was prevised, with text descriptors being used as placeholders for shots that were ultimately never made. A lot of the sequence was reshot, removing the presence of Poggle's droids, who had been abandoned due to the sandstorm, as well as Obi-Wan doing less of the action, with the Geonosians also taking their lightsabers and having Anakin instead be the one to free Luminara and chain Poggle, adding an additional sequence of Anakin squishing the brainworm. Dave Filoni specifically added the "study the bottom of my boot" line of dialogue for this. Instead of the clones uselessly shooting at the zombie Geonosians, they replaced it with them shooting out the support beams in the lair, replacing Queen Karina being responsible for the destruction, with her death being caused by this instead of the Jedi force pushing rubble into her. The final sequence also uses a rarely seen crash focus on Obi-Wan as he force pulls the brainworm. The brainworms don't seem to be present in any of these previous scenes, suggesting that they were retroactively added into the episode after the creation of CW212 Brain Invaders, with the intention most likely originally being that the death of the Queen in the episode ended the Geonosians' ability to become zombies, especially with the Queen establishing that she controlled the hive mind of the zombie Geonosians, which makes you question who was controlling it in Brain Invaders after the strong possibility of her death due to the temple collapsing on her. Karina also being annoyed at Poggle in the previous scene doesn't add up if her intention always was to infect the Jedi Order. The addition of the brainworms adds a valid reason for why they didn't kill Luminara outside of continuity reasons of her living to appear in Revenge of the Sith. There is residue of the original shot sequence within the succeeding Escaping Catacombs one, which has Obi-Wan dragging a shackled Poggle instead of Anakin, aligning up with what was originally shot. It was plausibly recreated due to said addition of the brainworms for their sequel episode, as well as the sandstorm element of the plot being added to the runtime, with it still needing to fit Cartoon Network's requirements. They would have had to have cut something else to meet them, with the lack of some shots alluding to the decision being made to cut it before the entire episode had been initially shot, with Lucas probably agreeing that it was best to cut it as he had also wanted for past examples. Anakin not doing any of the action of freeing Luminara and chaining Poggle further supports that the role of the Jedi accompanying Obi-Wan was once filled by the recently injured Ki-Adi-Mundi, who wouldn't have been able to do as much action as him. At the conclusion of this episode, Poggle the Lesser is arrested by the Jedi and taken into Republic custody. While he cameoed in The Jedi Who Knew Too Much in Season 5, he did not have another starring role, though, had the Clone Wars not been cancelled mid-production in March 2013, this would have changed, with the Jedi Council having freed Poggle from prison within one of the episodes for the unproduced Return to the Jedi story arc that featured the Sith Shrine. Why the Jedi freed Poggle is unknown, but it's possible that it could have tied into his information on the Death Star, considering the Jedi were already onto the trail of the giant Kyber crystal and ancient Sith superweapons by the conclusion of CW205 The Big Bang, which is the fourth and final episode of the Crystal Crisis on Utapau story arc. Or perhaps had to do with his native ability of being able to traverse catacombs, which would have been a direct follow-up to this episode. If the Return to the Jedi arc was to be produced, it would probably retcon the off-screen story of how Orson Krennic freed Poggle, who then subsequently escaped, with that story clearly being released under the impression that the Clone Wars arc would never get produced, with Filoni's sketches for the arc seemingly depicting their own explanation for how Poggle escaped custody by the time of Revenge of the Sith, with this version being something he would have discussed with George Lucas himself during the story sessions for the unproduced arc. Attachment is not compassion. With this episode being 3 production episodes after Legacy of Terror, it is possible that it wasn't originally planned alongside the 3 main episodes of the story arc, with it sharing a quality with CW202 Mystery of a Thousand Moons in regards to going deeper with the concept of something that was introduced in the previous episode, with the show at this point favouring 3-part arcs over 4 parts. Filoni stating on the Return to Geonosis featurette that it is rare that they do 4 episodes on one thing supports this, though, as we know, they would later standardise story arcs, being 4 episodes long. The opening scene lacks any of the camo troopers added in the rework of CW207 and also reuses the Republic shuttle first created for CW112, Lair of Grievous, with CW208 initially being set up with the zombie Geonosians being more spiritual. It is possible that George Lucas changed the source of the hive mind to the brainworms for this episode, as he didn't want to depict them as a Force culture before we got his version of Dathomir and the Night Sisters, with them instead being regarded as low-intelligent termites. A prevised scene just before the Padawans leave has Barriss state to Ahsoka how this will be their second mission together, as well as Anakin making sure that Ahsoka can do it without him, with the scene probably being cut due to how expositional it is. Tango Company have a striped tiger decal on their shoulder plate, with Clone Trooper Havoc being planned to have a small yellow smiley face on his helmet. Though this wasn't depicted within the final episode, but did show up on a different character model within the previous production episode that isn't a part of this story arc. Clone Ox has a one-eyed creature depicted on his left arm plate while wearing a blue ammo belt, also having a blue knee plate and some elbow guards, while Clone Pulsar uses the same head asset as Jester from CW201, the Hidden Enemy, also having diagonal stripes depicted on his helmet, forearms and shins. Clone Skive has the tiger decal on his helmet, while also having a tattoo of a tiger's jaws on his head. Clone Edge has bleached hair, a tiger decal on his right breastplate, a red triangle on his helmet, and, like Pulsar, reuses a clone head asset from the Hidden Enemy with that of Clone Sketch, which still even has the S tattoo on his brow. The design of the Republic medical frigate's interior is very reminiscent of the Tantive 4's interior. The Republic cog insignia is present on the pillows Ahsoka and Barriss use in their quarters, but is not featured on the clones' pillows. A deleted scene, which made it further into development than most, with full voice acting, has Ahsoka and Barriss talking with clones Pulsar and Havoc about going to the mess hall after not knowing what to do, with the clones suggesting Ahsoka and Barriss could play some sabacc. This scene seemed to imply that Havoc and Pulsar were not present within the clone barracks when Skive infected the other clones, with Pulsar potentially meant to be in place of Trap within the mess hall confrontation scene. Fully animated shots of the Geonosian parasite directly infecting the clones via their nostrils were created, but were cut very late into development, presumably due to a runtime limitation, or perhaps Cartoon Network didn't like the constant depiction of the worms directly infecting human characters and requested Lucasfilm to remove them to censor it. When Ahsoka talks with Barriss in the mess hall and states that Anakin does what needs to be done, an audio cue reminiscent of the Imperial March can be heard, this invoking when Palpatine orders him to lead Order 66 within Revenge of the Sith. Ahsoka directly mentions the events of CW201, The Hidden Enemy, a story she was not present for, as it predated her being assigned as Anakin's Padawan, with this episode being produced only 11 episodes later. There seems to be a missing scene within the episode which showed Trap and Havoc getting infected, with Trap just naturally revealing himself to have been after somehow perfectly deceiving Ahsoka and Barriss in the mess hall as if he wasn't infected, which is directly contrasted to how Skive, once being infected, acted noticeably off when trying to fit in, perhaps suggesting that the hive mind learned how to impersonate the clones more once it infected more of them. There is also a discontinuity with how Ox and Edge instantly attack the Jedi instead of trying to convert them like the other infected clones do. The possession of the clones and later Barriss is quite inconsistent. Sometimes they're silent, sometimes they act completely normal, like with Trap and Havoc as already mentioned, sometimes the clones speak in Geonosian, and then the infected Barriss later on has a different, more evil and eerie sounding voice. The implication in the episode is also that Anakin, Obi-Wan and Luminara did not inform the Padawans of the brainworms they had encountered within the Progate Temple, with it implying that they thought it was dealt with and didn't need to tell the Padawans, which comes up in complete contrast to how Anakin told Ahsoka about the events of the Hidden Enemy. A notable extension to the scene where Trap tries to spread the infection to Barriss was cut, which had Ahsoka react with shock to Barriss killing him, while Barriss didn't seem to care and was focused more on making sure she wasn't infected. Had this scene been kept, it would have helped make Barriss's betrayal within Season 5 feel less sudden, with there being hints towards Barriss's priorities being more self-preserving, hinting at the dark path she'd find herself heading down. The approaching Storm novel also has moments with Barriss that would align up with it too. The cold effects from CW205 Trespass have been continued here, this time adding a shaking effect to characters such as Ahsoka who are not wearing appropriate clothing for the conditions. Ahsoka, like her master in the previous episode, states that she has a bad feeling about this. Barriss attacking Ahsoka is unintended foreshadowing to her later betrayal within Season 5. Anakin invokes his inner Vader when torturing Poggle for information, with the music playing into this using another Imperial March motif. The Republic tugboat was a new asset designed and created for this episode. Extra scenes of the infected Barriss pursuing Ahsoka were prevised, where Ahsoka again purposely decides to flee instead of engaging in the fight. While not mentioned in the episode, the script reveals that it was Nala Se who made a brief return, still being stationed at a Republic medical base before she would return to Kamino in later stories. Kit Fisto is shown to have a familiarity with Ord Cestus, with this being another nod to the expanded universe with the novel The Cestus Deception. Despite this reference, however, it doesn't mean that the entire story is canon to the Clone Wars. Originally, when Ahsoka woke up, it was Obi-Wan who was present in the room with her instead of Anakin. While it makes more sense that Anakin would be there impatiently waiting for her to wake up, it is a shame that we lost this scene between Ahsoka and Obi-Wan, which was a less common pairing, especially with how this scene seems to have been developed more than the average deleted story reel scene. With how much Filoni talks about the importance of the scene on the StarWars.com featurette, it is highly likely that he was the one to change the character to Anakin, with him wanting to have the scene be the outcome of the entire story arc, with what Ahsoka learned being focused on, with the addition of Anakin's speech to her, informing her of her actions being right. The infected clones throughout this episode act similar to how they would during Order 66, where they are brainwashed by the inhibitor chips. It especially invokes the Order when Ox and Edge attack Ahsoka and Barriss. This similarity could have been something that contributed to George Lucas creating the inhibitor chips later during the show, though the clones being planned to be depicted with PTSD during the unproduced Star Wars Underworld could have also been a factor into that decision, with both this episode and Order 66 ultimately making the clones victims of things out of their control. One of the unproduced story arcs that were cancelled in March 2013 focused on Captain Rex and R2-D2, with its writer, Brent Friedman, stating it was partially inspired by Invasion of the Body Snatchers. This could allude to it potentially having something similar to this episode, where familiar characters are possessed, taken over, or copied for malicious purposes, which would also make it another foreshadowing of Order 66 like this episode has. With that story arc being 4 episodes long, they would have had more time to develop the eerie and unnerving aspect that didn't have enough time to be really focused on in this episode. With Senate Spy being the show's first production and release appearance of Lot Dodd, it reminds me how the character has been established to have died off-screen at some point during 19BBY, an event that could very well have happened within Padmé's unproduced Season 8 arc, which would have been her final political story, while Senate Spy was technically her first, considering Padmé's production Season 1 episodes didn't really involve the Senate and Republic itself, but instead specific worlds affected by the war or a battle taking place during it. Senate Spy is also the first time, chronologically, we get to see Anakin and Padmé as a married couple when it's just the two of them, though it would be the second production-wise being produced directly after Hostage Crisis. Padmé's surprised that Anakin calls her apartment home, which implies how little time they actually get to spend there together, with Anakin being busy fighting. Anakin using the Force to sense Padmé's mood is a subtle element of their toxic relationship, which gets more overt elements built onto it later in the episode when Anakin tries to control her decision of spying on Clovis. It's humorous when Padmé uses Anakin's own tactics against him, in stating that duty comes first in wartime. She's letting him know how it feels to be put second best to their war efforts, and what are essentially their jobs and career. Senate Spy, in my opinion, is an underrated episode that started the Clone Wars' thread of showing the deeper parts of Anakin and Padmé's relationship, which underneath the surface shows how it is quite toxic due to Anakin's attachment issues. This is something we know gets focused on again when Clovis returned, and also something that most likely played into Padmé's unproduced Season 8 arc that would have mixed in the guilt that both of them have of having helped appoint Palpatine as Chancellor, which has led to his abuse of emergency powers. Rewatching this episode especially reminds me how important that story arc is, and how it shouldn't be discarded just because one specific detail from a draft script may no longer be accurate, which anyone who knows how the Clone Wars was produced should know that that wouldn't stop the arc from being canon anyway, because a lot of the heavy lifting for the episodes were done throughout production, with people including Filoni and Lucas adding, removing and changing huge aspects of them. And considering Padme's story arc is now the least developed one, with the Siege of Mandalore having been produced, any discrepancy it may have could be ironed out if it ever gets produced. Though as we also know, canon is not equal between mediums and inconsistencies exist between projects that have been finished. It's interesting that Geonosis didn't have any space defense, though this is presumably due to Grievous and Ventress being at Dorin, taking those forces away, though it could also be due to how the Geonosians are more suited to living underground, so perhaps they treated the land battle as their space battle equivalent. It is interesting how Mundi just so happened to have flame troopers on hand, as that's a rarity for a clone legion, especially when it wasn't planned for them to crash land and have to venture through a cave of Geonosians to get to their destination. Perhaps Mundi being rescued by Anakin was removed because it felt off having a high-ranking member of the Jedi Council be trapped, with them deciding to make it Obi-Wan who is in need of rescue instead, to keep that as an element in play. You sort of feel sorry for the droid who is handed the bombs as it screams help before it explodes, with their overall characterization within the show making them more complex, in that while we know they are clearly the common enemies, you can't help but feel a bit bad for them with the way they are programmed being a bit wholesome. Anakin and Ahsoka force-throwing Rex off of the fortress is a bit sudden and could technically be classed as clone abuse, with him just having helped them beforehand. If the Jedi didn't catch him on the way down, they'd have potentially contributed to his death. Landing at Point Rain gives us another focus on the dynamic between Anakin and Ahsoka, showing how Anakin is tunnel-visioned into his in-the-moment strategies and forgetting what Ahsoka had already planned out with him, to her annoyance. But this is also countered with their droid numbers game, with both of these showing the differences and the similarities between the pair. It is reminiscent of how Henry Gilroy had stated that Anakin was the one with experience, while Ahsoka was the one with book smarts. Mundi also shows us that the Jedi aren't all stone cold either, with him having engaged in Ahsoka and Anakin's droid game. I think it is a shame that we lost out on getting to see a rookie clone on the front lines. It could have been a spiritual successor to CW205 rookies, in that we'd have actually seen the next step in how a clone started out, with this probably being inspired by individuals who would have been conscripted to go to war around the time of the D-Day landings, with Chatter having this fish out of water like characterization, where he was way out of his depth, as seen in the unproduced scene. The concept of us getting to see a rookie clone on the front lines would be briefly repurposed in CW217 Cat and Mouse, with Special Ops Trooper Spark, who reused the same model as Chatter, so the idea didn't completely get abandoned, though I think it would have been more of an intense depiction of this topic had we got the original via a ground battle. Weapons Factory gave us two Jedi pairings the show hadn't done before, with Ahsoka and Barriss, as well as Anakin and Luminara, with Ahsoka having learned to act more like Anakin with her improvisation within their current situation, such as using the tank to destroy the power source of the factory, as well as attempting to fix her communicator after her and Barriss get buried alive. Though, this is not to say that Barriss is useless in comparison, as her studying of the catacombs allowed the pair to destroy the factory in the first place. Barriss sort of reminds me of if Ahsoka had not become Anakin's Padawan, with Ahsoka's usage within this episode clearly being to show how his unorthodox methods have started to rub off on her too, but also that she doesn't have the attachment issues he does and was willing to sacrifice herself if it meant saving others from the droids that would have been produced from the factory. Luminara is used in her pairing with Anakin to represent how Anakin's attachment issues make him think more about the one than the many, Though, that's not to say that his faith and care for Ahsoka is wrong, it's that he has become too obsessed with the people he specifically cares about, with him acting the same way when both Ahsoka and Padme were poisoned in Mystery of a Thousand Moons. While Luminara may seem very cold towards Barris's fate, it's similar to how Kit Fisto dealt with the death of Nadar in Lair of Grievous, with Luminara even rightly stating that she will mourn her Padawan, but also celebrate her life and the positives it had, with her also knowing that letting the emotions get to you during this vital moment could lead to worse consequences, especially with the previously mentioned potential effect that Geonosis specifically would have on the Jedi. This aspect makes me wonder if Luminara perhaps appeared within the unproduced Kashyyyk arc alongside Yoda and Clone Force 99, which would have potentially allowed us to see her address the fall of Barriss, though she could have also just let go of her after she said she would be prepared to do so, something which she knows Anakin would have more trouble doing, with us seeing that at the conclusion of Season 5, as well as him not being able to accept Ahsoka's decision to leave within the unproduced Crystal Crisis on Utapau story arc, which had him essentially calling Ahsoka a disappointment, with Obi-Wan defending her decision there, which is sadly an undeveloped character arc for Anakin during the latter part of the war, due to the Clone Wars' cancellation, with this most likely being something that would have been developed further within the unproduced Sith Shrine story arc. Though, we did get a glimpse of this within the second episode of Ahsoka's Walkabout, which showed Anakin had developed to the point of being able to let her go, with the unproduced arc potentially even having Anakin and Ahsoka work on their relationship throughout it, with him ultimately being proud of her for looking out for those in need, something he briefly mentions in the produced version of the Siege of Mandalore, with him stating that she left to be where she needed to be. Legacy of Terror gives us a deeper look into the lore of the Geonosians, revealing their hierarchy of being led by a queen. It also reveals that the Geonosians have a long-term goal of infecting the galaxy with their hive mind brainworms to expand their empire beyond Geonosis. It is a shame that Queen Karina's role in the episode was reduced. The characters seem to be less of a focus in the episode due to instead focusing on the lore, but we do get to see how Luminara is more like Anakin than she'd admit, with how she was tunnel visioned in capturing Poggle. Though, unlike Anakin, she was willing to sacrifice her life within the catacombs to prevent anyone else suffering the same fate. The episode, unfortunately, has the biggest oversight in regards to how it opens, with the production team either running out of time or forgetting to update it to acknowledge that Mundi no longer got seriously injured within landing at Point Rain. Had Anakin not squashed the worm in Legacy of Terror, it would have been able to help him prevent Ahsoka and Barriss from being taken over by them, with this yet again showing his in-the-moment way of thinking, which can have a negative consequence long term. Ahsoka bringing up that she doesn't know how to enjoy the peace while it lasts shows us how she has gotten used to fighting in the war. She has forgotten what it was like to not be in active conflict. Barriss, being older, tells her how Mace Windu states that they're peacekeepers, not warriors, but Ahsoka wonders whether they will still be warriors after the war has ended, alluding to how the war seems to be changing the Jedi, including herself. She has lost the ability to be able to tell the difference, which is something Barriss also doesn't seem to have the answer to. The episode ending with the theme of the Jedi having to weigh their attachments is an interesting thought to end on, though we know that Anakin never truly grasps his and ends up being manipulated because of them. I think that personally, Brain Invaders is my least liked episode of the 5, despite its character moments with Ahsoka and Anakin that I do enjoy. The overall premise didn't have much time to be told, and the more I think about it, the more it feels like it wasn't always intended to be a part of the Geonosis arc, because if it had, it could have been worked into the previous episodes more outside of the majorly reworked sequence with Queen Karina in Legacy of Terror. The concept would have been better and more refined if they had more time with it, feeling like Brain Invaders was less cooked compared to other episodes in terms of consistency, which is probably due to them having having to go back and majorly rework Landing at Point Rain, with Brain Invaders getting the short straw as a result. With the unproduced Season 8 Rex arc having a similar Body Snatchers theme present from the beginning, it just adds another reason to want that arc to be released, as it could perhaps allow more time for this type of story to be fleshed out. The second Battle of Geonosis arc is another major milestone in the Clone Wars' production, and is yet again another arc that is overlooked by the section of people who regard the Clone Wars as bad until Season 3. The story raised the stakes in terms of how they would produce an episode, with Landing at Point Rain especially showing that they could do a lot of work on an episode but have to throw it all out and start again if George Lucas did not like the product, with it being a testament to how experienced and locked in this production team at Lucasfilm Animation was, that they were able to essentially remake the episode from scratch, as well as make it align up with the later Geonosis episodes to a point where the average viewer doesn't even notice, especially with how production deadlines had limited them in the past. In the case with CW205 Cargo of Doom, that is more obvious. You can also tell that the story arc as a whole further cemented how they would come to favour planning a story as 4 episodes long from the get-go, to avoid having to majorly alter episodes much later into production to match up with ideas they came up with after. I now have an active channel membership available. This will grant you exclusive perks like emojis in the comments, usernames listed in my outros, and updates to what's coming next posted exclusively for members in the community tab. But the best feature is you get 5 days early access to new videos, and you will be supporting me at the same time. To find out more, you can click the join button on my channel page. Thank you to anyone who considers becoming a channel member. Thank you for watching. Please see the video description below for interesting links, sources and credits. If you enjoyed, please like, subscribe and comment, as it will really help the channel continue to grow.